My name is Claire Donovan. I'm the older sister, the tech entrepreneur, the one who always shows up overdressed and alone. And on the day my little brother got married, I walked into the venue by myself with my shoulders straight and my chin slightly lifted, not because I wanted to make a statement, but because I had long ago learned that blending in was never really an option for me. The venue was stunning in that overly manicured, Pinterest-perfect kind of way. Everything gleamed. From the marble floors to the champagne towers, it was all staged to impress. But the moment I stepped through the front doors, all that polish turned cold. The air changed as if the temperature dropped a few degrees just for me. Conversations dipped in volume, and a sea of perfectly done-up faces turned slightly in my direction, not out of excitement, but assessment. There's a specific kind of silence that only happens in rooms full of people who've already decided who you are. It's not loud, but it presses in from all sides. I caught a few subtle nods from distant cousins I hadn't seen in years, the kind that came with tight smiles and quick glances down at my hand. No ring, no escort, no soft edges to soften my presence. The ceremony hadn't started yet, so most guests were mingling around the floral arch and cocktail stations. I moved slowly, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to give them time to stare. If they were going to talk, I wanted to give them something to talk about. My dress was black, simple, but sharp with clean lines and no embellishments. My heels made just enough noise to echo slightly against the stone floors. I didn't smile. Not yet. A group of women near the fireplace tilted their glasses toward one another as I passed. One of them whispered something and laughed softly behind the rim of her flute. I didn't need to hear the words to know what she said. It was always some variation of poor thing, or must be hard for her, or you'd think she'd have found someone by now. My presence was a question they didn't want to ask out loud. A successful woman at a family event without a +1. How curious. I scanned the room for my parents but didn't see them. What I did see was my brother James standing at the edge of the reception hall, deep in conversation with his new in-laws. His fiancée, no wife, now Samantha, stood next to him, radiant and glowing in a dress that sparkled like it had been sewn with diamonds. She waved at someone behind me, then turned back without even noticing I'd arrived. There was no welcome committee for me. No hand on my arm, no excited relative pulling me in for a hug. I wasn't surprised. I had RSVP'd. I had sent a gift from the registry. But that was where my participation seemed to end in their minds. I was invited, sure, but not expected in the way that meant anyone had saved me a seat near the front or thought to introduce me to anyone new. I chose a spot near the edge of the room, close enough to see, but not be seen. From there, I could watch the interactions. I could observe the dynamics. The father of the bride clapped James on the back like he'd just closed a business deal. Samantha's mother was already crying, dabbing carefully around her makeup. A photographer directed flower girls into formation, their sashes flapping as they fidgeted under the weight of adult expectations. I sipped the sparkling water someone had handed me at the bar and tried not to let the loneliness bite too hard. I've been alone in bigger rooms than this. I've walked into investor meetings where no one expected me to speak, let alone lead. I've handled boardrooms full of men who called me sweetheart before they knew who signed their checks. This wasn't new, but it was personal. A waiter passed with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. I declined, and he hesitated just long enough to give me that look, the kind that flickers between pity and discomfort. Then he moved on. I exhaled slowly. My hands were steady. My breath was even. But my chest felt tight, like someone had quietly locked a door inside me that I'd forgotten to prop open. I saw my mother, then emerging from a side hallway in a tailored blush suit that matched the drapes. She was mid-conversation with Samantha's aunt, her head thrown back in laughter that felt a little too deliberate. When her eyes met mine across the room, there was a flicker of recognition. She nodded once. Not a wave, not a smile. Just a nod, like checking a box. I nodded back. That was our language. Efficient, distant, cordial. By the time I reached my table, table 11 near the back, the ceremony was about to begin. I took my seat quietly, smoothing the hem of my dress, folding my hands in my lap. A woman 2 chairs over leaned into her husband. I caught the tail end of her sentence. She's the sister, the one who lives in New York, the tech one. They nodded together like they were identifying a bird. That was fine. I didn't need applause. I just needed to be here. I needed to walk into this room fully visible without apology. Because the truth was, this wasn't about them. It never really had been. This was about me. Showing up, standing still, letting them look, and not flinching. Growing up, I was always the one who asked too many questions. Not the cute kind, like, why is the sky blue, or where do babies come from? Mine were heavier. Why does Dad only smile when James is around? Why does Mum tell me to lower my voice when I'm just talking? Why does being quiet feel like the only way to be loved in this house? My little brother James was sunshine bottled into a boy. He had the easy smile, the floppy hair, the jokes that landed every time. He could spill a glass of juice on the rug and get a head pat. I'd ask to skip a school dance so I could finish a science fair project and get a sigh and a lecture about missing out on normal experiences. That word came up a lot. Normal. Be normal. Try to be like the other kids. By the time I hit middle school, I had already stopped trying to fit in. I didn't like makeup or slumber parties. I liked circuits, puzzles, and code. I built my first website when I was 12. No one noticed. James joined a soccer league, and suddenly every Saturday was game day, and the living room was filled with orange slices and enthusiastic yelling. I was always upstairs alone, staring at screens that felt more welcoming than my own family. In high school, things got worse. James had his first girlfriend by his sophomore year. My mum bought him cologne. I had my first internship. She didn't ask where it was. At family dinners, I'd start talking about machine learning or new UI models, and my dad would glance at the TV like I was speaking another language. Eventually, I just stopped talking altogether. There was one night, I remember so clearly it still stings. I had just come back from a summer program at MIT. I was 14. I had built an app that tracked food waste in school cafeterias. I was proud. I told my parents over dinner. My mum asked if I remembered to pack the thank you card for Aunt Gail's birthday instead. That was it. No follow-up, no curiosity. Just back to James's driver's test and what kind of car he wanted. I was labelled intense, difficult, and too focused. It didn't matter that I was earning awards or scholarships. In our house, those weren't the currencies that counted. Charm, ease, conformity. Those were the things that earned praise. James had them. I didn't. When I got into Stanford, my parents told people I was going to California for school, like I was chasing sunshine, instead of working toward the top tech program in the country. James enrolled in state college and got a backyard barbecue in his honor. I packed my own boxes and left without much more than a nod. Stanford was the first place I felt like I wasn't too much. My roommates didn't flinch when I spoke fast or stayed up debugging lines of code. Professors invited me to office hours to go deeper, not tell me to slow down. It was addictive, the feeling of being seen, not corrected. But even then, I still called home. Still sent photos. Still tried to bridge the gap. My mum would ask if I was eating well. My dad would remind me not to forget to call Grandma. They never asked what I was building or what I was working on. I told myself it was generational. I told myself they cared in their own way. After graduation, I got a job at a startup in Brooklyn. I shared the news in the family group chat. My mum replied with a thumbs up. James texted, "Congrats, nerd." I laughed out loud. It wasn't warm, but at least it felt familiar. The startup was scrappy and brutal, and I loved every second of it. I worked 16-hour days. I ran on cheap takeout and late-night strategy calls. I taught myself to negotiate, to pitch, to lead. Every round of funding we closed felt like proof that I was doing something right. But still, every holiday I came home to a dining room where James's career in real estate got more questions than my entire company. At Thanksgiving 2 years ago, I mentioned we had crossed 5 million in revenue. My dad nodded and asked if I was seeing anyone. I looked down at my plate and changed the subject. I'd learned by then that some answers weren't worth giving. There's a particular kind of ache that comes from wanting to be celebrated, not for what you represent, but for who you are. I didn't want applause for being a woman in tech. I just wanted someone in my family to ask what my company actually did, to ask why I was passionate about systems or what I hoped to build next. But they didn't. Maybe they didn't know how, or maybe they just didn't care. I stopped hoping for it eventually. I stopped expecting the call after a product launch or the email after press coverage. I started measuring my life in different metrics. Milestones that didn't rely on their validation. Customers retained, talent recruited, code deployed. I built my world from scratch and watched it stand. But there was always that small, stubborn part of me that wondered what it would feel like to be known, not just respected, but understood. Not just tolerated, but loved for the way my mind worked, instead of in spite of it. That part never fully disappeared. It's why I came to the wedding. Not for reconciliation, not for redemption, but maybe just to stand in that room with all their expectations and judgments and prove to myself that I didn't need any of it to be whole. I had already built something better, and for once, I wasn't going to hide it. The ceremony moved forward like clockwork. Everything was choreographed to perfection, from the timing of the music to the exact pace of the flower girls down the aisle. I watched from my assigned seat back row, far right where the camera angles wouldn't accidentally catch me in the footage. The officiant made a joke about fate and timing. Everyone laughed politely. I didn't. My fingers traced the edge of my napkin while I counted how many times Samantha's family leaned in to whisper something and glance back at me. 4, then 5. Each time their expressions were identical. Surprise first, then dismissal. Samantha's cousin, a woman with perfect posture and a name tag that read, Marissa, turned to the woman beside her and tilted her head toward me. I heard her whisper it. That's Claire, the one who works all the time, the one who's intense. The pause before the word landed like a slap I'd been bracing for since I arrived. I excused myself and went to the bar. I wasn't in the mood for wine, so I ordered soda water with lime. The bartender didn't ask questions. That was a relief. Behind me, I could still hear the drone of clinking glasses and curated playlists. I took a slow breath, the kind you take when you're trying to decide whether to survive or vanish. A few moments later, I felt someone approach. I turned slightly. It was my mother. She looked polished, composed, with a strand of pearls and a pressed smile. She reached out as if to straighten the sleeve of my dress, but stopped midway and pulled her hand back. I see you found your seat, she said. I nodded. I didn't mention it was next to a column half hidden from view. She glanced at the drink in my hand, then back up at me. You didn't want anything more festive. I shook my head. She nodded like that confirmed something for her, though I couldn't say what. After a moment, she sighed. You look very sharp, Claire. Maybe a little businesslike, but that's you, I suppose. I forced a smile. Thanks, Mum. She opened her mouth as if to say more, then closed it again. Her eyes shifted toward the main hall. You should come back in. They're doing the family photos. My smile faded. I wasn't invited for the photos. We both knew that. She didn't wait for me to respond, just gave me one last look and walked off, heels clicking gently like punctuation marks on polished marble. I stayed where I was, sipping the soda water, even though the lime had gone flat. Eventually, I drifted back inside. Not toward the altar, but toward the far side where the reception was being set up. The place settings looked like something out of a bridal magazine. Gold cutlery, custom menus, and name cards in calligraphy. I found mine easily: Claire Donovan. No title, no +1. James passed by once right before the first dance. He looked happy, genuinely so. His cheeks were pink and his smile was loose, like he'd already had a few drinks. He saw me, did a little finger wave, and kept walking. No hug. No, "Hey, I'm glad you came." Just a casual flick of acknowledgement, like I was an old teacher or a guest speaker from some long-forgotten event. The lights dimmed and the newlyweds stepped onto the dance floor. Everyone watched as they twirled to a carefully chosen song that probably had some kind of significance. I didn't recognize it. I watched anyway. Not out of support, just out of the need to stay still and not draw more attention by moving. As the dance ended, the DJ queued up the next track, and the announcer began calling out tables for the buffet. I stayed seated. No one invited me up. 2 seats away, an older man turned to his wife and said, "It's good they had such a nice turnout. I think even that workaholic sister showed up." She nodded and said something I couldn't hear. I didn't want to. Later, as guests lined up to toast, I saw Samantha's aunt glance in my direction and nudge the woman next to her. "Isn't that the one who's still single?" Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It carried in the way judgment always does, the way it finds your ears whether you're listening or not. Then my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. 3 words. "Just don't embarrass us." I stared at it for a second. Then it changed. A second bubble. "Just don't make it about you." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. They'd already made it about me, just not in the way they thought. It started with a sentence that wasn't meant for me. One of those soft, casual murmurs that carry more weight than they should. I had just returned to my seat with another glass of soda water when I heard it from behind. She probably thinks showing up alone makes her mysterious. The voice was low male and unfamiliar, then a second one, dry and amused. Or it's just sad. Like watching someone dress up for a party that they never wanted them there at. I didn't turn around. My fingers curled around the glass too tightly. The condensation slid down to my wrist. My pulse thudded in my throat. I looked down at my name card again, at the gold script, trying to make me feel like I belonged. It didn't work. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it landed sharply. I breathed in through my nose, slow and steady, the way you do when you're trying not to cry in public. Then I stood up. It wasn't dramatic, just a quiet shift of chair against floor, a slow rise to my feet. But in my chest, everything cracked. My spine stayed straight. My eyes stayed forward, but inside something tipped. I couldn't stay here. Not for another toast. Not for another sidelong glance or careless joke that wasn't meant to cut, but still bled. I gathered my clutch. My coat wasn't far. My car is even closer. The exits were clear. I could disappear. No one would notice. They'd finish their drinks, pose for photos, and maybe later someone would ask if I was still around, and someone else would say they thought I left early. I started moving toward the door. The room didn't react. Music played, glasses clinked, people smiled oblivious. The couple behind me kept talking, switching now to someone's hairstyle or the flower arrangements. My footsteps felt heavy, the kind of weight that doesn't come from the body, but from years of biting back the urge to scream. Then something shifted. A sound. Subtle. A chair scraping back from the main table. Not rushed, not accidental. Deliberate. I paused. My body stopped before my mind could process why. The room hadn't gone quiet yet, but something in the air pulled taut, like the moment right before lightning strikes. I turned just slightly enough to see what had interrupted the rhythm, and there he was, rising from his seat with slow precision, not looking at the bride, not at my brother, but directly at me. And in that second, every breath in the room held still. Richard Langston stood fully upright, the kind of posture that made people look even if they didn't know who he was. The music hadn't stopped, but it dimmed in relevance like the room itself sensed something was shifting. Conversations faltered. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Every head near the head table turned. He stepped away from his seat with slow, deliberate ease. No urgency, no need for attention. Yet all eyes followed him. He walked past Samantha and James, past the glittering display of curated elegance, until he reached the edge of the dance floor. Until he stood just a few feet from me. Then, without a word, he bowed. A full, clean, unmistakable bow. Not the kind you give out of habit or because etiquette demands it. This was something else, a gesture soaked in intention, measured, grounded, deep. Gasps scattered across the room like glass shattering on marble. Someone dropped a spoon. A phone camera clicked. The DJ went still. It was the kind of silence that swallows a room whole. I stood frozen. Not out of fear, not even surprised, but because my body hadn't yet caught up to the enormity of what was happening. He stayed in that position for a beat longer than necessary enough for the message to land. Then he straightened, looked me in the eye, and said my name like it held weight, like it meant something beyond my bloodline. Miss Donovan, it's a privilege to finally meet you. My breath caught in my throat. He continued. Your keynote at the Zurich summit shifted the direction of how we approach decentralized data transitions across all our European holdings. I've followed your work for years. I owe you a thank you. Behind him, James looked confused. Samantha blinked like someone had turned on a light she wasn't ready for. Across the room, my mother's smile dropped, and my father sat completely still, eyes darting between Richard and me, like trying to solve a puzzle whose pieces he never thought mattered. I didn't speak right away. My voice wasn't ready, but my spine lengthened, my shoulders squared. I gave a small nod and said softly, "Thank you, Mr. Langston. It's mutual." In that moment, the room didn't know what to do. Applaud stare. Pretend they hadn't spent the entire evening measuring my worth by what I lacked. They recalibrated in real time. I watched it happen, and for the first time all night, I didn't feel out of place. I felt undeniable. After the toast, the room didn't quite return to normal. People smiled a little tighter. Their laughter took an extra second to come. I could feel their recalculations as they glanced my way now, with something that looked like curiosity or maybe caution. I didn't move. I stayed seated, hands resting on my lap, back straight, breath slow. My mother approached a few minutes later alone. Her steps were careful, like someone walking across thin ice. She stopped beside my chair and looked down at me with an expression I hadn't seen in years. Not judgment, not impatience. Uncertainty. She leaned in and said I looked beautiful tonight. I nodded once. Thank you. She hesitated, We didn't know about Zurich, about Mr. Langston. Her voice trailed off. She smiled, then added quietly, "We're proud of you, Claire." I looked up at her and asked, "Why now?" She blinked like I'd slapped her. "Excuse me." I kept my tone even. "Why are you proud now? Because someone important said my name in a room full of strangers? Or because you finally believe I'm worth being proud of?" She opened her mouth but didn't speak, just reached for my hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. I let her hold it for a second. Then I let go. I stood and walked outside into the cooler air. The music played on inside something upbeat, probably for the next round of dancing. The stone patio was quiet. A few guests milled about, sipping drinks and pretending not to look my way. James found me out there a few minutes later. His tie was loosened, his jacket unbuttoned. He stepped beside me with the air of someone who thought small talk could fix big things. He said he didn't know Richard Langston knew me. I said, "You never asked." He frowned. "That's not fair." But it was. It was just accurate. For years I had listened to his updates about closings and commissions and client drama. I'd sent him gift cards when he landed big contracts. He'd never once asked what I did beyond calling me the one in tech. As if my entire career was some background character trait that didn't need explaining. He said he always thought I was too smart to need people checking in. I said that's a convenient excuse for ignoring someone. He didn't argue. He just looked down at the ground, shifting his weight, like he wished he could step backward in time and fix it. I told him I wasn't angry, not really, just tired. Tired of being a ghost at my own family's table. Tired of editing myself down to fit into rooms I had outgrown years ago. Tired of showing up out of loyalty when that loyalty was never mutual. He said he never meant to make me feel invisible. I smiled. Maybe you didn't mean to, but it still happened. And tonight, for the first time, I realized I didn't have to keep sitting at a table that kept forgetting to set a place for me. He asked if I'd come back inside. I shook my head. I said the fresh air was better. He looked at me for a long time, then nodded slowly and walked away. I stayed outside, breathing in the stillness. The stars were out, faint but present. I could hear laughter echoing faintly through the open doors. But it didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore. That moment with my mother, that short, quiet conversation with my brother, it didn't fix anything. It didn't erase the years of being overlooked, dismissed, and misunderstood. But it marked something else. A line drawn not in anger, but in clarity. I didn't owe them an explanation anymore. I didn't owe them forgiveness on their timeline. I had spent years trying to earn affection that came with caveats, pride that only showed up after external validation. Now I had something better. Peace. Not the loud kind, not the cinematic kind with swelling music and grand speeches. Just the kind that settles in your bones when you stop asking for permission to be seen. When you realize your value doesn't need a family vote to count. They would return to their tables, to their stories, to the version of me they were comfortable with. But I wasn't stepping back into that version ever again. The air outside had cooled just enough to sting. I leaned against the stone railing of the patio and watched the lights flicker across the reception hall windows. Inside, the party was still going, full of laughter and glass clinking and stories that would be repeated for years to come, most of them missing the truth. I didn't feel left out. I felt done. Not bitter, not broken. Just finished trying to be invited into a space that had never been built for someone like me. I heard footsteps behind me, slow and firm. I didn't turn right away. Somehow I knew who it was. Richard Langston came to stand beside me, his jacket open, his tie loosened just enough to show he wasn't here to impress anyone. He didn't speak at first, just stood there in the quiet. It felt companionable, like the kind of silence people earn after surviving different versions of the same war. He finally said I wasn't trying to make a scene. I nodded. I know. You were trying to make a correction. He smiled, faintly eyes still on the lights across the lawn. Some illusions deserve to be broken. He turned toward me then and said something unexpected. He told me he was starting a new initiative, something forward-thinking, long-term complex. He wanted me on the ground floor, not as a favor, not as a name to drop, but as a partner. He said he'd followed my work since Zurich, that he respected the way I think, that he needed someone who wasn't afraid to disrupt quietly, someone who didn't need applause to build something meaningful. I didn't answer right away, not because I doubted him or myself, but the decision didn't feel urgent. For once, I wasn't chasing anything. I was choosing. I told him we could talk on Monday. He said that was more than enough. Then he nodded, once the kind of nod that seals things without contracts or speeches, and walked back toward the valet line. I stayed behind the wind, cool on my face, my hands resting on the cold stone. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't glowing with vindication. I was simply clear. For so long I had measured my worth by the echoes it made in other people's eyes, family, friends, strangers at weddings. But tonight I stood still and listened for something else. And what I heard was peace. Real respect doesn't shout. It doesn't require performance or translation. It just shows up and stands beside you in the quiet, asking nothing except that you keep going. That was what Richard offered, and what I finally offered myself. No need to prove anything, just the space to build something new, on my own terms, without apology, without waiting to be seen. I turned away from the building. The sky was darker now, clean and bare. The road ahead wasn't lit by anyone else's approval. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. Some people wait their whole lives for someone else to say they matter. For a parent to finally be proud. For a room to finally quiet down and listen. But the truth is, your worth doesn't live in their applause. It doesn't sit in someone else's timeline or their idea of success. Real freedom begins the moment you stop performing for recognition and start living for your own clarity. Not because you've given up, but because you've outgrown the need for approval from people who never tried to understand you. You're not hard to love. You're just not made to be small. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away from the table that never saved you a seat and build your own space instead. The ones who get it will find you there. The rest never saw you to begin with. And that's no longer your burden to carry.